How's it going, YouTube? Before I get into the video, let me remind you, if you like my content, hit that like and subscribe button. And also, if you feel the need to support me, hit me up on my Patreon at patreon.com/uncommonramen, capital U, capital R, as I do all this in my free time, so any amount of support can help me bring more of this content to you more often. Okay, today we're going to look at Ashling the Pilgrim. I don't know why I wanted to build this deck. I guess I think she has a very neat ability. So let's jump in. She is 1 in a red for a 1/1. For 1 in a red, you can put a +1/+1 counter on her. If this is the third time the ability resolved this turn, remove all +1/+1 counters from her and deal that much damage to each creature and each player. So we're going to do some +1/+1 counter synergies and some other mono red shenanigans. I don't know why I build these decks. There's I just hate my friends, I guess. So let's take a look at our creatures. Oh, I guess I didn't realize those were also creatures. How many creatures are in here? Okay. So we're going to start out with an agitator ant. This is 2 in a red for a 2/2. At the beginning of your end step, each player may put 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature they control. Goad each creature that had counters put on it this way. We have Arcbound Slasher for 4 and a red. Is a 0/0 with modular 4. It has Riot. We have Arcbound Slith for 2. It is a 0/0. Whenever Arcbound Slith deals combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Has modular 1. Got Arcbound Tracker for 2 and a red. It is a 0/0. It has Menace and modular 2. When you cast a spell other than your first spell each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Arcbound Tracker. We have Brash Taunter for 4 and a red. It is a 1/1 with Indestructible. When Brash Taunter is dealt damage, it deals that much damage to target opponent. And for 2 and a red, you can tap this to have Brash Taunter fight another creature. We've got Cacophony Scamp for 1 red. It is a 1/1. When Cacophony Scamp deals combat damage to a player, you may sacrifice it. If you do, proliferate. When Cacophony Scamp dies, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. We got Coal Hauler Swine for 4 and 2 red. It is a 4/4. When Coal Hauler Swine is dealt damage, it deals that much damage to each player. Drill Works Mole for 1. It is a 1/1. You can pay 2 and tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on it, and a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target commander creature you control. Frillscale Mentor for 2 and a red is a 3/2. When Frillscale Mentor enters the battlefield, put a menace counter on target non-human creature you control. 2 and a red, tap, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control with menace. Ill-Tempered Loner for 2 and 2 red. This is a 3/3. When Ill-Tempered Loner is dealt damage, it deals that much damage to any target. For 1 and a red, Ill-Tempered Loner gets +2/+0 until end of turn. It has Daybound, so we're going to take a look at its Nightbound side. Howlpack Avenger. Whenever a permanent you control is dealt damage, Howlpack Avenger deals that much damage to any target. For 1 and a red, Howlpack Avenger gets +2/+0 until end of turn, and it has Nightbound. Okay, we got ourselves an Iron Apprentice. For 1, it is a 0/0. Enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. When it dies, if it had a counter on it, or if it had counters on it, put those counters on target creature you control. Kami of Celebration for 4 and a red is a 3/3. Whenever a modified creature you control attacks, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. Whenever you cast a spell from exile, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Mog Maniac for 1 and a red. It is a 1/1. When Mog Maniac is dealt damage, it deals an equal amount of damage to target opponent. Mer Scrappling for 1. It is a 1/1. You can sacrifice it to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Rage Forger for 2 and a red. It is a 2/2. When Rage Forger comes into play, put a +1/+1 counter on each shaman creature you control. Whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it attacks, you may have that creature deal 1 damage to target player. Runaway Steamkin for 1 and a red is a 1/1. Whenever you cast a red spell, if Runaway Steamkin has fewer than 3 +1/+1 counters on it, put a +1/+1 counter on Runaway Steamkin. Remove 3 +1/+1 counters from Runaway Steamkin. Add 3 red mana. Scavenge Brawler for 6, it is a 4/4. It has Flying, Vigilance, Trample, and Lifelink. And for 5, you can exile it from your graveyard and choose a creature to put 4 +1/+1 counters on it, a Flying counter, a Vigilance counter, a Trample counter, and a Lifelink counter on that creature. And you can only do that as sorcery. Smoke Braider for 1 and a red, it is a 1/1. You can tap to add 2 mana of any combination of colors to your mana pool. Spend this mana only to cast elemental spells or activate abilities of elementals. Sulfime, Mayhem Dominus for 2 and 2 red is a 5/4. If a source you control would deal non-combat damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals double that damage to that player or permanent instead. For 1 and 2 Phyrexian red mana, discard 2 cards, put an indestructible counter on Sulfime, Mayhem Dominus. Soulbright Flamekin for 1 and a red. It is a 2/1. For 2, target creature gains trample until end of turn. If this is the 3rd time this ability has resolved this turn, you may add 8 red mana to your mana pool. Sparring Construct for 1. It is a 1/1. When Sparring Construct dies, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Steel Dromedary. For 3, it is a 2/2. Steel Dromedary enters the battlefield tapped with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. Steel Dromedary doesn't untap during your untap step if it has a +1/+1 counter on it. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you may move a +1/+1 counter from Steel Dromedary to target creature. Stuffy Doll for 5. It is indestructible. As it enters the battlefield, choose a player. Whenever Stuffy Doll is dealt damage, it deals that much damage to the chosen player, and you can tap Stuffy Doll to deal 1 damage to itself. Taurian Mauler for 2 and a red. This is a 2/2 with Changeling. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, you may put a +1/+1 counter on Taurian Mauler. Thundering Reiju for 2 and 2 red. This is a 3/3. It has haste. Whenever Thundering Reiju attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Then Thundering Reiju deals X damage to each opponent, and X, where X is the number of modified creatures you control other than Thundering Reiju. Tawashi Guidebot. This is 4 for a 2/1. When Tawashi Guidebot enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. 4 and tap, you can draw a card. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each modified creature you control. Okay, next up is going to be instants. There we go. Starting with Arcbound for 2 and a red. Choose target creature. Whenever that creature is dealt damage this turn, it deals that much damage to each other creature and each player. Chaos Warp for 2 and a red. The owner of target permanent shuffles it into their library, reveals the top card of their library, and if it is a permanent card, they put it into the battlefield. First Day of Class for 1 and a red. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and it gains haste until end of turn. You can also learn, which in this particular case, for Commander's sake, means that you can discard a card and draw a card. Soulsfire for 2 and a red. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to any target. Thrill of Possibility for 1 and red. As an additional cost to cast the spell, discard a card and then draw 2 cards. Volt Charge for 2 and a red. Volt Charge deals 3 damage to any target and then proliferate. Next up is sorceries. We got Blasphemous Act for 8 and a red. It costs 1 less for each creature on the battlefield, and it deals 13 damage to each creature. Chandra's Ignition for 3 and 2 red. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to each other creature and each player. Expanded Anatomy for 3. Put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature. It gains vigilance until end of turn. Explosive Entry For 1 and a red, destroy up to 1 target artifact. Put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target creature. Iron Crag Feet. For 1 and 3 red, add 7 red. You can cast only 1 more spell this turn. Kick in the Door. I believe that's not the last one. Kick in the Door for 1 red. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. That creature gains haste until end of turn, and can't be blocked by walls this turn. Venture into the dungeon. And then finally, we got Mana Geyser for 3 and 2 red. Add a red mana to your mana pool for each tapped land your opponents control. All right, next up is artifacts. Ooh, there's a lot. All right, we're going to start with an animation module for 1. Whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are placed on a permanent you control, you may pay 1. If you do, create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token. For 3, you can tap this and choose a counter on target permanent or player. Give that permanent or player another counter of that kind. Arcane Signet costs 2. You can tap it for your color identity. Armory of Erois for 2. Whenever equipped creature attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and it equips for 2. Basilisk Collar costs 1. Equipped creature has Death Touch and Lifelink, and it equips for 2. Blade of the Blood Chief for 1. Whenever a creature dies, put a +1/+1 counter on equipped creature. If equipped creature is a vampire, put 2 +1/+1 counters on it instead, and it equips for 1. We have Contagion Clasp for 2. When Contagion Clasp enters the battlefield, put a -1/-1 counter on target creature, and you can pay 4 and tap it to proliferate. Ecologist's Terrarium. This costs 2. When Ecologist's Terrarium enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. And you can pay 2 and tap this and sacrifice it to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature and only activate it as a sorcery. We have Empowered Auto Generator for 4. Empowered Auto Generator enters the battlefield tapped. You can tap it to put a charge counter on Empowered Auto Generator and add X mana of any one color, where X is the number of charge counters on Empowered Auto Generator. Fire Diamond costs 2, enters tapped, and taps for red. Mithril Coat costs 3, has flash, is indestructible. When it enters the battlefield, you attach it to target legendary creature you control, and equipped creature has indestructible. It equips for 3. We've got Power Conduit, costs 2. You can tap it to move a charge counter, or I think it's any counter. Move any counter off of a permanent you control, and place a charge counter on an artifact you control, or a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control. I believe that's what it does. Pretty sure. Ring of Valkus. For 2, equipped creature has haste. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a +1/+1 counter on equipped creature if it is red, and it equips for 1. We have Shadow Spear for 1. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has trample and lifelink. You can pay 1 to have permanents your opponent's control lose hexproof and indestructible until end of turn, and equips for 2. Got Soul Ring. It costs 1. You can tap it for 2. Sword of Hours, it costs 2. Whenever equipped creature attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage, roll a d12. If the result is greater than the damage dealt, or the result is 12, double the number of +1/+1 counters on that creature. It equips for 2. Sword of Truth and Justice, this costs 3. Equipped creature gets +2/+2 protection from white and blue, and whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control, then proliferate. It equips for 2. Then we have the Ozolith. It costs 1. Whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, if it had counters on it, put those counters on the Ozolith. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if the Ozolith has counters on it, you may move all those counters from the Ozolith onto target creature. Throne of Eldraine costs 5. As it enters the battlefield, choose a color. You can tap it to add 4 mana of the chosen color, but only to spend it on monocolored spells of that color. And you can pay 3 and tap it to draw 2 cards, but only spend mana of the chosen color to activate the ability. We have Wayfarer's Bauble, costs 1. You can tap 2 and tap this and sacrifice it to search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. Weapon Rack, I believe, is the last one here. For 4, Weapon Rack enters the battlefield with 3 +1/+1 counters on it. You can tap it to move a +1/+1 counter from it to a creature and activate that ability only anytime you can cast a sorcery. Okay, next up is enchantments. We're going to start with All Will Be One. For 3 and 2 red, Whenever you put one or more counters on a permanent or player, all will be one deals that much damage to target opponent, creature an opponent controls, or planeswalker an opponent controls. Braid of Fire costs 1 and a red, has cumulative upkeep, add 1 red mana. Curse of Stalked Prey costs 1 and a red, enchants a player. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to enchanted player, put a +1/+1 counter on that creature. Gratuitous Violence for 2 and 3 red. If a creature you control would deal damage to a creature or player, it deals double that damage to that creature or player instead. Visions of Phyrexia. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. At the beginning of your end step, if you didn't play a card from exile this turn, create a tapped Power Stone token. Okay, next up is non-basics, which, because this is monocolor, there's going to be very few of them. We have Cave of Temptation. You can tap it for colorless. You can also pay 1 and tap it to add 1 mana of any color. You can also pay 4 and tap it to sacrifice it to put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature. Only activate as a sorcery. We've got Forge of Heroes. You can tap it for colorless. You can tap it to choose target commander that entered the battlefield this turn. Put a +1/+1 counter on it if it's a creature, and a loyalty counter on it if it's a planeswalker. We have Hall of Oracles. It taps for 1 colorless. You can pay 1 and tap it to add 1 mana of any color, or you can tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Activate only as a sorcery, and only if you've cast an instant or sorcery spell this turn. We've got Karn's Bastion. Taps for colorless. You can pay 4 and tap it to proliferate. We have Opal Palace, which you can tap for colorless, or you can pay 1 and tap this to add 1 mana of any color to your mana in your commander's color identity. If you spend this mana to cast your commander, it enters the battlefield with a number of additional +1/+1 counters on it equal to the number of times it's been cast from the command zone this game. We got Tyrite Sanctum. You can tap this for colorless. You can also tap 2 and tap this to give target legendary creature becomes a god in addition to its other types, put a +1/+1 counter on it. And you can pay 4 and tap this and sacrifice it to put an indestructible counter on target god. And then finally we have Witch's Clinic, which taps for colorless, or you can pay 2 and tap it to have target commander gain lifelink until end of turn. And then last we've got Basic Mountains. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28. So that's the Ashling the Pilgrim deck tech. We're basically just trying to get a bunch of +1/+1 counters onto Ashling and then utilize creatures that when they get dealt damage, they deal that much damage to something or to some things. So, like, for instance, the Brash Taunter, Ill-Tempered, what's-his-face. So that when she finally does blow up and deal damage to things, you get, like, extra value out of it. We've got the Sulpheme and the Gratuitous Violence to kind of amp that up as well. Just to kind of, make your friends hate you. So yeah, that's Ashling the Pilgrim. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. Keep it positive. I will remove negative comments. And until next time, guys, peace.